The most powerful woman in the city could buy almost anything she wanted. The only thing she couldn't buy was the heart of the man who refused to notice her. The rain had just stopped over downtown Chicago, leaving the glass towers shimmering beneath a pale October sun. Commuters hurried along the sidewalks with paper cups in hand, while traffic rolled through the streets in a steady hum. 40-year-old Ethan Brooks stepped out of a maintenance truck and adjusted the collar of his worn work jacket. His hands carried the marks of years spent fixing things other people overlooked. Broken wiring, failing generators, flickering lights. He had learned long ago that most important work happened quietly. Inside Whitmore Global Headquarters, employees moved quickly through the marble lobby, barely glancing at the maintenance contractor walking toward the service elevator. Ethan preferred it that way. Attention had never interested him. At exactly 4:15 p.m., his phone buzzed. He smiled before answering. "Hey, sweetheart." A cheerful voice instantly filled his ear. "Daddy, don't forget today." Ethan laughed softly. "I would never forget. You promised. And I always keep my promises. Even when you're busy? Especially when I'm busy." 8-year-old Lily Brooks giggled. The sound warmed something deep inside him. "Good," she said. "Because today is important." "I know it is. See you soon." When the call ended, Ethan stood still for a moment. The noise of the city faded into the background. There were promotions he had never chased, opportunities he had quietly declined. But every afternoon, when Lily called, he knew exactly where his priorities belonged. 3 floors above him, Claire Whitmore stood inside a corner office overlooking Lake Michigan. At 35, she was one of the youngest CEOs in the country to lead a Fortune 500 company. Reporters described her as brilliant. Investors called her unstoppable. Competitors called her dangerous. Yet none of those titles felt meaningful at that particular moment. Her attention was fixed on a security monitor showing the maintenance hallway downstairs. "Who is that?" she asked. Her assistant looked at the screen. "Maintenance contractor. Ethan Brooks." Claire frowned slightly. "The one who fixed the server room outage last month." "Yes." "Interesting." The assistant blinked. Claire rarely noticed anyone outside executive circles. But something about the man caught her attention. Maybe it was the calm way he walked through the building. Maybe it was the absence of urgency. Everyone around her seemed desperate for something. A promotion, approval, influence. Yet Ethan Brooks moved through the world like a man who already knew what mattered. Later that afternoon, Claire stepped into an elevator just as the doors were closing. "Hold it, please." The doors opened. Ethan stepped inside carrying a toolbox. "Thank you," Claire said. "No problem." The elevator began its descent. Silence settled between them. Most people recognized Claire instantly. Most people became nervous. Most people tried too hard. Ethan simply pressed the lobby button and looked ahead. After several seconds, Claire smiled. "Do you work in this building often?" "Sometimes." "You seem familiar." "Could be." Claire waited. Nothing else came. For the first time in years, someone wasn't trying to impress her. The elevator doors opened. Ethan nodded politely. "Have a good evening." Then he walked away. Claire remained standing there longer than necessary, watching him disappear into the crowd below. Around her, executives hurried to meetings worth millions of dollars. Phones rang. Elevators opened and closed. Yet somehow the most important moment of her day had just lasted less than 30 seconds. And for reasons she couldn't explain, Claire Whitmore suddenly wanted to know everything about the quiet single father who seemed completely unaware that one of the most powerful women in America had just started thinking about him. 2 weeks passed, and Claire Whitmore found herself doing something she had never done before. She was looking forward to seeing someone who had no idea she was looking for him. The realization was almost embarrassing. She managed board meetings involving billions of dollars without hesitation, yet somehow a quiet contractor with a toolbox occupied more of her thoughts than she cared to admit. On a cool Thursday afternoon, she spotted Ethan again near the East Wing electrical room. He was reviewing maintenance notes while speaking with a building supervisor. There was nothing extraordinary about the scene. No dramatic moment. No attempt to impress anyone. And perhaps that was exactly what made him impossible to ignore. "The replacement should last another 10 years, Ethan said. "But if the wiring is neglected, you will be right back here again. You always make things sound simple," the supervisor replied. Ethan smiled. Most complicated problems start with simple things people ignore. Claire heard the comment as she approached. Something about those words lingered. The supervisor left, and Ethan turned to gather his tools. Mr. Brooks. Ethan looked up. Ms. Whitmore. You remembered my name. You are the CEO. Claire laughed softly. Fair point. For a moment, neither spoke. Outside the nearby windows, gray clouds drifted across the Chicago skyline. Employees moved through the corridor carrying laptops and coffee cups. Life continued around them. Yet the silence felt surprisingly comfortable. Would you like to join me for coffee? Claire asked. Ethan looked mildly surprised. Coffee? Yes. It is not a contract negotiation. Just coffee. A faint smile appeared. I appreciate the invitation, but I have somewhere I need to be. Most people would have rearranged their schedules instantly. Ethan simply checked his watch. Claire found that oddly refreshing. Family, she asked. My daughter. His expression softened immediately. She comes first. There was no hesitation in his answer. No apology. No explanation. Just certainty. Claire nodded. She is lucky. Ethan shook his head. I am the lucky one. Later that evening, curiosity got the better of her. Not the curiosity of a CEO investigating a business opportunity. Something far more personal. She drove through quiet suburban streets until she reached the address listed in a routine contractor file. It was not a mansion, not an exclusive neighborhood, just a modest brick home on a peaceful street lined with maple trees. Claire remained inside her car across the road. The porch light glowed warmly against the early autumn dusk. Through the front window, she could see Ethan helping a young girl with what appeared to be a school project. Construction paper covered the dining table. Colored markers were scattered everywhere. That star is crooked, Lily said. It is supposed to be crooked, Ethan replied. It gives it character. You made a mistake. That is another possibility. Lily laughed. The sound carried faintly through the open window. Claire watched Ethan pretend to defend his artistic skills while his daughter dissolved into giggles. Nothing about the scene was impressive by corporate standards. No awards. No headlines. No wealth. Yet something inside Claire tightened unexpectedly. She had spent years surrounded by ambitious people chasing success. But sitting there beneath a simple porch light was something many of them never found. Peace. As she prepared to leave, Lily suddenly looked toward the window. Dad, what is it? When I grow up, I want to marry somebody kind like you. Ethan smiled and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. Then make sure you find someone who is even kinder. Across the street, Claire felt her heart grow strangely quiet. And for the first time in years, the most successful woman in the room wished she were sitting at a table covered in construction paper instead of inside a corner office overlooking the city. The following Saturday arrived wrapped in bright autumn sunlight and cool air drifting in from Lake Michigan. Claire had spent the entire morning pretending she was not thinking about Ethan Brooks. By noon, she finally stopped pretending. She found herself standing outside a community center on the north side of the city after remembering a casual comment he had made days earlier. Lily had a school fundraiser there. Claire told herself she was only curious. Deep down, she knew that was no longer true. Inside the gymnasium, folding tables displayed homemade crafts, bake sale boxes, and colorful student artwork. Parents chatted beneath strings of paper decorations while children ran between booths carrying raffle tickets and cups of lemonade. It was simple, unpolished, ordinary, the kind of place Claire had not visited in years. Then she saw them. Ethan stood behind a table covered with handmade birdhouses. Sawdust still clung to his sleeves. Lily sat beside him proudly collecting donations. $5 for the blue one, Lily announced to a customer. $10 if you want the deluxe model. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Deluxe? Lily nodded confidently. The roof is straighter. The customer laughed and handed over $10. I will take the deluxe model. Ethan shook his head. You are a better salesperson than I am. Obviously. Claire smiled before she realized she was smiling. A few moments later, Lily spotted her. Dad, that is the elevator lady. Ethan turned. Surprise crossed his face. Ms. Whitmore. Claire is fine, she said. Lily immediately stood. You know my dad? A little. Lily grinned. Everybody should know my dad. Ethan looked embarrassed. Claire found that oddly charming. Well, Claire replied, I am starting to think you might be right. For the next hour, she stayed longer than she intended. She helped sell raffle tickets. She listened to Lily describe every school project she had completed that year. She watched Ethan quietly repair a broken display stand without being asked. Everywhere he went, People greeted him warmly. Teachers knew him. Parents respected him. Children ran toward him without hesitation. Not because he was wealthy or important, because he showed up. Again and again. As afternoon sunlight poured through the high gym windows, Claire found herself sitting beside Ethan on a wooden bench. "You seem popular," she said. Ethan laughed softly. "I do not think that is the word." "Then what is?" He considered the question. "Reliable, maybe." The sounds of the fundraiser drifted around them. Laughter. Conversations. Sneakers squeaking across polished floors. Small moments that somehow felt larger than boardrooms and earnings reports. "Most people underestimate reliability," Ethan continued. "Showing up every day is not exciting. But it matters." Claire looked at him quietly. "You really believe that?" "I do." "Why?" Ethan glanced toward Lily. She was helping a younger child carry a stack of books. "Because somebody showed up for me once when I needed it most." Claire waited for him to continue. He did not. The answer ended there. Another piece of a story he chose not to tell. A few minutes later, Lily ran back toward them carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate. One for Dad. One for Claire. Claire accepted the cup. "Thank you." Lily smiled brightly. "You should come with us next Saturday." Ethan looked surprised. "Lily, what?" she asked innocently. "I am just being friendly." Claire laughed. For the first time in years, the sound came easily. But as she looked at Ethan, another thought quietly settled into her heart. She was no longer wondering whether she liked him. The real question was why a good man with so much warmth in his life still carried a sadness that never completely left his eyes. And for the first time, she wanted to know the answer. November arrived with colder winds sweeping through Chicago, carrying golden leaves across sidewalks and filling the mornings with a quiet chill. Over the following weeks, Claire became a regular presence in Ethan and Lily's lives. Sometimes she joined them for Saturday breakfast at a small diner with red vinyl booths. Sometimes she attended school events. Sometimes she simply stopped by after work with hot chocolate and listened to Lily talk about books, science projects, and dreams for the future. The friendship felt natural, comfortable, almost effortless. Yet the closer Claire became to Ethan, the more she noticed something she could not explain. There were gaps in his life. Small gaps at first, then larger ones. One evening they sat together outside his house as the sun disappeared behind rows of maple trees. Lily was inside finishing homework. Porch lights glowed up and down the street. The neighborhood settled into its familiar rhythm of barking dogs, distant traffic, and families gathering for dinner. Claire smiled. "You know, I have heard stories about every year of Lily's life." Ethan nodded. "She likes telling stories. I have heard about your first apartment. That place was terrible. Your first truck. Even worse." Claire laughed softly. Then she tilted her head. "But I know almost nothing about your life before Chicago." Ethan's smile faded slightly. "There is not much to tell. Everybody has a story. Not every story needs to be told." The answer was gentle, but final. Claire did not push. Still, she noticed the change immediately. Ethan had become very skilled at changing directions whenever conversations approached certain parts of his past. Days later, another detail caught her attention. During a planning meeting at Whitmore Global, Claire's assistant entered her office carrying a scheduling folder. "There is one issue with next month's charity gala." Claire glanced up. "What issue?" "December 12th. The assistant checked her notes. "You asked whether Ethan Brooks and Lily would attend." "Yes." "Mr. Brooks already declined." Claire frowned. "The invitations were sent this morning. According to his response, he is unavailable every December 12th. That evening she called him. "You turned down the gala." "I did." "You did not even think about it." Silence lingered briefly. "I already had plans." "Every year." Another pause. "Every year." Claire stood beside her office window, overlooking the city lights below. "Can I ask why?" "No," the answer came softly. Not angry, not defensive, just firm. After the call ended, Claire remained staring at the skyline. Snow flurries drifted past the glass. Something felt different now. Not wrong, but different. The following week brought another surprise. Ethan disappeared. On Friday afternoon, he left work early. His phone went directly to voicemail. He answered no messages. By Saturday evening, he still had not responded. Even Lily was staying with a trusted neighbor. Claire tried to ignore the growing unease. Then Sunday morning arrived. She happened to pass through a quiet suburban intersection while driving to a meeting. And there, nearly half an hour outside the city, She saw Ethan's truck parked beside an old cemetery she had never noticed before. He stood alone near the far edge of the property, carrying white flowers in his hands. The winter wind moved through the bare trees above him. Everything about the scene felt solemn, personal, important. Claire remained inside her car, watching from a distance. She did not approach. She did not call out. She simply watched as Ethan stopped before a weathered gravestone and lowered his head. And for the first time since meeting him, Claire realized there was an entire chapter of his life hidden behind those quiet eyes. A chapter he had spent years protecting from the rest of the world. The image of Ethan standing alone in that cemetery stayed with Claire for days. No matter how many meetings she attended or reports she reviewed, her thoughts kept returning to the quiet man holding white flowers beneath a gray winter sky. Something about the moment felt larger than grief. It felt like a promise, a burden, a memory he had carried for years. The following Monday, snow drifted lightly across downtown Chicago as Claire arrived at Whitmore Global before sunrise. The building was nearly empty. The marble lobby echoed softly beneath her heels as she stepped into the executive elevator. Normally, she would have been focused on quarterly projections or investor calls. Instead, she found herself staring at a single note written on a yellow legal pad. Ethan Brooks, December 12th. Cemetery. Unknown past. Claire sighed and pushed the paper aside. She did not like investigating people she cared about. Yet uncertainty had a way of growing when left alone. Later that afternoon, she sat across from her longtime chief legal officer, Robert Sinclair. Robert had worked with her father before her and knew more about corporate history than anyone in the company. As she reviewed documents, she casually asked a question. "Have you ever heard of someone named Ethan Brooks?" Robert looked up. "Should I have?" "Probably not." She hesitated. "What about a man named Daniel Mercer?" The reaction was immediate. Robert stopped turning pages. "Where did you hear that name?" Claire felt her stomach tighten. "Why?" Robert leaned back slowly. "Because 15 years ago that name was everywhere." The office suddenly felt quieter. Snow tapped softly against the windows. Downtown traffic moved far below like distant currents. "What happened?" Claire asked. Robert stared toward the skyline. There was a financial scandal involving a technology development company. Huge media coverage. Careers destroyed. Families affected. Daniel Mercer became one of the central names connected to the investigation. Claire felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "And Ethan Brooks?" Robert frowned. "I think he was connected somehow." The answer stayed with her all evening. That night, unable to ignore her growing concern, Claire searched through old public archives. Most articles had long been buried beneath newer stories. Yet eventually she found them. Grainy newspaper photographs. Headlines faded with time. Corporate hearings. Public accusations. And there, among the names, she saw it. Ethan Brooks. Her heart sank. She stared at the screen. The man she knew. The father who built birdhouses with Lily. The man who fixed broken things without asking for recognition. His name appeared beside one of the most controversial stories of that decade. Claire read every article she could find. Yet the deeper she looked, the stranger the story became. Facts seemed incomplete. Timelines did not fully match. Important details appeared missing, almost as if someone had intentionally left pieces out. Then she opened one final archived photograph. Her breath caught. The image showed a younger Ethan standing beside another man, Daniel Mercer, the same name carved into the gravestone Ethan visited every December. Outside her penthouse apartment, snow continued falling across the city. Inside, Claire stared silently at the screen. The mystery she had been trying to understand was no longer hidden. But somehow the answers had only created bigger questions. The discovery changed everything. For the first time since meeting Ethan, Claire found herself questioning not who he was, but whether she had ever truly known him at all. The archived articles remained open across her laptop screen late into the night. Headlines from 15 years earlier painted a harsh picture. Corporate misconduct, missing investment funds, public hearings, damaged reputations. And somehow Ethan Brooks had stood near the center of it all. Yet the more Claire read, the more unsettled she became. The facts never seemed complete. Every article repeated the same accusations, but very few explained what actually happened. It was as if the entire story had been frozen at the moment of judgment and never revisited afterward. The next morning, Whitmore Global's executive board gathered for a quarterly strategy meeting. Normally, Claire commanded the room effortlessly. Today, her focus drifted. Numbers appeared on presentation screens. Market forecasts filled the discussion. Yet her thoughts remained elsewhere. Then one of the senior board members spoke. "Claire, there is another issue." She looked up. "What issue?" "Your relationship with Ethan Brooks." The room grew quiet. Several executives exchanged glances. "What about it?" Claire asked. The board member slid a folder across the table. Someone found his history. Her stomach tightened. The folder contained copies of the same articles she had read the night before. "This is old," Claire replied. "Old does not mean irrelevant." Another executive leaned forward. "Public perception matters. Investors notice these things." Claire closed the folder. "You are discussing a man, not a stock price. We are discussing risk." The conversation continued, but Claire barely listened. What bothered her most was not their concern. It was the realization that they had reached conclusions without understanding the full story. Later that evening, snow fell steadily across the city as Claire drove toward Ethan's neighborhood. She needed answers. Real answers. Yet when she arrived, she found only Lily sitting at the kitchen table finishing homework. "Hi, Claire." "Hi, sweetheart. Is your dad home?" Lily shook her head. "Not yet. Working late." No, Lily looked down at her notebook. "Today is one of those days." Claire felt her pulse quicken. "What do you mean?" "Sometimes he gets quiet." Lily carefully erased a pencil mark. "Usually around this time, every year." The house felt unusually still. A clock ticked softly somewhere down the hallway. Warm light filled the kitchen. Yet beneath the comfort lingered a sadness that seemed woven into the walls themselves. "Does he ever tell you why?" Claire asked gently. Lily shook her head again. "Dad says some promises are hard to explain." The answer stayed with Claire long after Ethan returned home an hour later. He looked tired. Not physically, emotionally, like a man carrying something heavy that no one else could see. They spoke briefly. Simple conversation. Weather, school, weekend plans. Neither mentioned Daniel Mercer. Neither mentioned the articles. Neither mentioned the cemetery. Yet the silence between those subjects grew louder with every passing minute. Then as Claire prepared to leave, her eyes landed on a framed photograph sitting alone on a bookshelf. A younger Ethan stood beside Daniel Mercer. Both were smiling. Both looked hopeful. And written beneath the photograph in faded ink were 4 words that made Claire stop breathing for a moment. "Brothers are chosen too." Claire barely slept that night. The photograph remained in her mind long after she left Ethan's house. Brothers are chosen too. For simple words. For words that somehow made the mystery feel even deeper. Over the next several days, pressure began closing in from every direction. News of Ethan's connection to the old scandal quietly circulated among members of Whitmore Global's leadership team. Investors asked questions. Board members scheduled private conversations. Every discussion ended the same way. Concern, doubt, warnings. One snowy afternoon, Claire sat alone in her office staring at the Chicago skyline. The city looked cold beneath a blanket of gray clouds. Her phone buzzed. It was Ethan. For a moment she smiled. Then she remembered the folder sitting on her desk. The archived headlines. The unanswered questions. The silence. She answered. "Hi. You sound tired," Ethan said gently. "Long week. Do you want to get dinner tonight?" Claire closed her eyes. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately. To forget the board. Forget the articles. Forget everything except the peace she felt around him. Instead, she asked the question she had been avoiding. "Why did you never tell me about Daniel Mercer?" Silence filled the line. Not an uncomfortable silence. A sad one. "You found out." "I had to." Another pause. Snow drifted past her office windows. Somewhere below, sirens echoed faintly through downtown traffic. "There are things in my past I do not talk about," Ethan said quietly. "Why?" "Because some stories belong to more than one person." Claire swallowed hard. Were the articles true? Parts of them. Which parts? Ethan did not answer immediately. The answer would not change what happened. Claire felt frustration rising for the first time. "Then help me understand." "I cannot. Or you will not." The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. Finally, Ethan spoke. "Sometimes protecting a promise costs more than people realize." Claire looked down at the folder on her desk. Every warning from the board echoed through her mind. Every unanswered question. Every missing piece. "I do not know what to believe anymore." The words hurt more than she expected. Ethan's voice remained calm. "Then believe what you have seen." Claire felt tears gathering despite her effort to remain composed. I need time. Another long silence followed. If that is what you need, Ethan said softly, then take it. The call ended. No anger. No accusations. No dramatic goodbye. Just two people standing on opposite sides of a truth neither could fully reach. That evening, Claire drove home through falling snow. The city lights blurred against her windshield. For the first time since meeting Ethan, she felt completely lost. Across town, Lily sat at the kitchen table coloring a winter scene when she noticed her father staring quietly out the window. Did something happen? She asked. Ethan managed a small smile. Not exactly. Lily studied him carefully. You look sad. Ethan walked over and kissed the top of her head. Sometimes people need time to find answers. Lily frowned. Will Claire come back? Ethan looked toward the darkening sky outside. His expression never changed. I hope so. But after Lily went to bed, he remained standing by the window long after midnight. And for the first time in many years, the man who had carried every burden without complaint looked completely alone. 3 days after their conversation, Claire received an unexpected phone call. The voice on the other end belonged to an elderly woman named Margaret Mercer. At first, the name meant nothing. Then her heart nearly stopped. Mercer. Daniel Mercer. The same name on the gravestone. The same name hidden inside every unanswered question. You do not know me, the woman said gently, but I think we need to talk. Snow covered the city that afternoon as Claire drove to a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Chicago. The house was small and well cared for. Wind chimes swayed softly on the front porch. Inside, framed family photographs covered nearly every wall. Margaret greeted her warmly and led her into a living room filled with memories. You care about Ethan, do you not? She asked. Claire hesitated before nodding. Very much. Margaret smiled sadly. Then you deserve to know the truth. For the next hour, Claire listened without interruption. 15 years earlier, Ethan and Daniel had built a technology company together. They were not just business partners. They were best friends. Family in every way that mattered. Then tragedy struck. Daniel became seriously ill during the height of a corporate investigation involving financial decisions made by several executives. Public accusations spread quickly. Reporters wanted someone to blame. Investors demanded answers. According to Margaret, Daniel had been terrified, not for himself, but for his wife and young son. He was afraid his family would lose everything, Margaret explained. Their home, their future, their peace. Claire sat silently as the pieces began falling into place. What happened? Margaret's eyes filled with emotion. Ethan protected them. Claire frowned. Protected them how? The older woman opened a wooden box and carefully removed several documents. Letters, legal records, personal statements, evidence that had never been made public. The mistakes were not Ethan's, Margaret said quietly, but he allowed people to believe they were. Claire stared at the papers in disbelief. Why would anyone do that? Margaret smiled through tears. Because Ethan made Daniel a promise. The room grew still. Outside, snowflakes drifted slowly past the windows. Daniel knew he did not have much time left, Margaret continued. He wanted his wife and son protected from public humiliation. Ethan chose silence. He accepted blame. He walked away from his career. He lost opportunities. Friends disappeared. People judged him. But Daniel's family survived with dignity. Claire felt tears slipping down her cheeks. Suddenly everything made sense. The missing details. The refusal to defend himself. The annual cemetery visits. The sadness behind his eyes. He had not been hiding guilt. He had been honoring a promise. Margaret handed her one final envelope. Daniel wrote this before he passed away. Claire carefully opened it. The handwriting was faded but clear. One sentence stood alone near the bottom of the page. If anyone ever calls Ethan a good man, tell them they still do not know half the story. Claire lowered the letter and covered her mouth. In that moment, she understood something profound. The man everyone had questioned had spent 15 years carrying a burden that was never truly his. Not because he had to, because he chose to. And for the first time since discovering the secret, Claire realized the truth was far more beautiful than anything she had imagined. The annual Whitmore Global Winter Gala arrived beneath a sky filled with softly falling snow. Hundreds of guests gathered inside the grand ballroom overlooking the Chicago River. Crystal chandeliers cast warm golden light across polished floors. Executives, investors, community leaders, and media representatives filled the room. Conversations flowed easily. Music drifted through the air. Yet Claire Whitmore stood quietly near the stage, thinking about only one person. Earlier that morning, she had made a decision. Not as a CEO, not as a business leader, as a woman who finally understood the truth. Across town, Ethan was helping Lily decorate sugar cookies in their kitchen when his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and saw Claire's name. For a moment, neither spoke after he answered. Then her voice came softly through the line. "Will you come to the gala tonight?" Ethan looked toward the window. Snowflakes drifted past the glass. "I thought we already discussed that. Please." The single word carried more emotion than anything else she could have said. Ethan remained silent. "Trust me," Claire whispered. Several hours later, Ethan entered the ballroom wearing the same quiet confidence he carried everywhere. Lily walked beside him in a blue winter dress, smiling brightly as she admired the decorations. Guests glanced toward them with curiosity. Some recognized him immediately. Others remembered the articles. The whispers began almost at once. Ethan noticed them. He always did. But as usual, he ignored them. Then Claire stepped onto the stage. The room slowly quieted. She looked across the crowd before finally finding Ethan standing near the back beside Lily. "Before we continue tonight's program," she began, "there is something important I need to say." The ballroom fell silent. Claire took a slow breath. Over the past few weeks, many people have discussed a man standing in this room. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. They discussed headlines, rumors, assumptions, pieces of a story. Her voice grew stronger. "Including me." Ethan lowered his eyes slightly. Claire continued, "I believe there were questions that needed answers. What I discovered was something entirely different." She held up a single folded letter. Daniel's letter. 15 years ago, a man made a promise to protect a family. He kept that promise at the cost of his own reputation, his career, his future. He accepted judgment without defending himself because protecting others mattered more to him than protecting his own image. No one spoke. No one moved. The room listened. For 15 years, people misunderstood his silence. Claire's eyes filled with emotion. "I was one of them." She stepped down from the stage and walked directly toward Ethan. The ballroom remained completely still. Hundreds of people watched as she stopped in front of him. "Ethan Brooks," she said softly, her voice carrying throughout the room. "The man everyone questioned is the best man I have ever known." Tears filled Lily's eyes. Ethan stood speechless. Claire reached for his hand. "You taught me something important. Character is not what people say about you. Character is what you choose when nobody understands your sacrifice." A few moments later, applause began somewhere near the back of the room. Then another. Then another. Soon the entire ballroom rose to its feet. Yet Ethan barely noticed the crowd. His attention remained on Claire, on Lily, on the two people standing beside him. The people who finally knew the truth. Lily wrapped her arms around both of them. Claire laughed through tears. Ethan smiled. And for the first time in 15 years, the burden he had carried alone no longer belonged only to him. Around them, the ballroom slowly grew quiet again. Not the silence of judgment. Not the silence of misunderstanding. The silence of respect. The silence of grace. The silence that comes when truth finally finds its way home. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more stories of courage, kindness, and second chances, because the people the world overlooks often leave the greatest impact.